So, we've flown out into the middle of nowhere to do a one-man rescue mission. 13 years before Hideo Kojima would make it cool.
Kept you waiting, huh?
Now we're out in the Californian desert near an abandoned Air Force base, which presumably led to the adjacent town being depopulated. And so, naturally, it looks like we're about to wander into Reno during the 1980s. This is supposed to be a simple hostage exchange scenario where both sides are planning to double-cross, and Bob Page has chosen an abandoned gas station outside of town in a particularly desolate area. So desolate, the only people are 2 or 3 bums, depending on who you've murdered or allowed to be murdered, that Majestic 12 evict as part of their prep. The level was dark, desolate, and had special condition that if you alarmed Majestic 12, they would run and kill Tiffany Savage. It's simple, to the point, used a familiar premise for the buildings, and managed to still be fairly compelling if short. In vanilla, you start on an underpass road. It keeps you out of sight of the guards, and in a spot where you get to meet the bums. A simple and elegant solution because it gave you the idea that Jock dropped you as close as possible that would still be out of sight, and encouraged you to walk forward, talk to the bums, then come back, and then go into the tunnel. In Revision, you start on the other side of the broken bridge so you can have a few extra buildings to loot. Literally, why else would they exist? Opportunities to snipe across the ditch if you're still going for that kill range, I suppose, and generally just drag out the level. Also, there's no obvious way to go across, so unless you were familiar with the vanilla version, you could easily think it's unsafe to go down into what is now a riverbed in the desert. Once you're in the ditch, there's water and plants, with this one out-of-place plant, further confusing things. See, in real life, Vandenberg is in a fairly green area since it's on the coast, but Iron Storm made it look more like it was out in the desert of California, that's more inland. Revision seems to have gone with an unholy combination of both. Of course, this is a minor issue in comparison to this detail. In vanilla, the gas station is the only building for miles, so it was where the bums were hiding out, and they're moving on the traffic road, blocked road, was a response to the Majestic 12 team ejecting them. In Revision, there's perfectly good buildings just up the bank they could have moved into. I guess they were just as confused as the driver of this car. The original challenge of the gas station was that it was designed, well, like a gas station. Simple, open, fairly spacious so that cars and trucks can maneuver. That meant that you didn't really have a huge amount of cover on your way to one obvious location where they must be keeping Tiffany Savage. Like most real gas stations, it only had some lights, but only in places where customers would want to go. The new layout has a ridiculous number of lights and a whole bunch of extra objects, so they can create what I'm sure is supposed to be more engaging, but is, in reality, hamstrung by the same amateur design decisions that you see in the cathedral level. The guards wander about without protecting each other, and it's easier to maneuver around the guards than it is at Liberty Island. On top of that, there's now more tankers, in case you want to get bored and try to climb in all of them. A tightrope walk, which they really didn't cover that in the Academy tutorial. Security cameras that are just set up on light pole. And a boarded up house that is home to Caustic Creative's most baffling creation yet. More compelling than Milton or the Cubby Hubbies. One of the great things about Deus Ex was it gave minor characters their own stories, and let the player get time to know them, such as the bum couple in the gully and Sandra Renton. So let's get to know one of Caustic Creative's new characters. Here's this Majestic 12 guard who is deployed inside the crumbling remains of a house that is long abandoned, and apparently built without bathrooms, though it still has electricity. His job is to watch the security monitors that are there for some reason. But it's so painfully boring that instead he just sits looking blankly into space, retreating into his own mind. To protect himself, he set up a single landmine on the stairs and had his co-workers board up the door so he can't leave. He's trapped in there, with nothing but bullets and lamps. He can't even trigger an alarm if he's alerted to an intruder. He has no food, no coffee, no water, no bathrooms. No one to come relieve him, and no place to relieve himself. He sits here, patiently waiting for death to come, without complaint or action. What happened to this man? What series of events led to this? Who hurt him? These are questions I fear we will never get the answer to. This tunnel is now pitch black, because apparently darkness is great and everyone loves playing on maps where they can't see shit. They added these security cameras which are just attached to power poles. Not above a door or attached to a wall like a real security system would have, but just tacked onto a power pole just so they can see the door. And the inherent problem with this is it could be easily approached from behind under normal circumstances. Even if it was just set up in a rush by Majestic 12, it raises two questions. Why did Majestic 12 set up the camera out in a well-lit open area on an exposed location when they could have set it up on the building itself, on the wall or on an area where it would be protected? And secondly, why the fuck did they set up the security room in this weird house? Why not set it up in the garage next to Tiffany's cell? Speaking of questions, let's get on to analysing all of this. Now, this level actually had a fair bit of potential for tidying up and optimization, if you wanted to do all the general tidy-up work that Ion Storm just did not get the chance to do. They were, after all, still working to a release date and had some issues.
I called that particular milestone the "Wow, these missions suck" milestone. Harvey Smith, the lead designer, had been telling me, stop being a kitchen sink designer and cut stuff.
If you go look at the original level, you can find the assets were basically floating out of bound because clearly they never got around to that level of tidying up. So it's safe to say there was work that could have been done. The biggest danger with a level that has this sense of immediacy and sort of urgency to it is that since it's small and straightforward, there's a temptation to just expand it out. And then you wind up with a project that is basically eating itself, particularly if you're misunderstanding what Warren and other developers mean by wanting levels to be bigger and more expansive.
We wanted big outdoor areas. The tech was not up to it. We had to break things up into smaller areas, which actually did hurt the game some.
See, Warren didn't mean that he wanted his levels to get all big, empty area for the player to wander about pointlessly and get bored in. Nobody wants that, except perhaps Hitman Contract's diehard fans. No, he wanted his levels to be full of wild shit.
Yeah, I think he gets lost in the places he builds. I mean, he had all this other stuff that got cut out of here, like the pirate island.
Oh, God.
And like a whole bunch of stuff done by the canals. It's just this Kong Kong went on forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was so much to explore here.
So, for a level like this, whenever you expand out an area, you should stop and think, is this level design eating itself? And by that I mean, is it eating away and eroding the appeal of the level itself? As a general rule, if your edition does not provide any interesting challenges, thematically consistent novelty, expansion of the player's knowledge, or opportunity for expansive play, then it's probably going to take a bite. If it's optional, and if it's mandatory, it's just going to chew straight through the whole enjoyable experience and leave nothing but an empty husk. Expanding out the opening area to show off all the pretty lights doesn't really add anything interesting, particularly since the original Unreal Engine is only capable of doing the basics in terms of lighting effects. so it can't really capture the beauty of a gas station at night. It just subjects the player to a period of confusion, followed by boredom. This isn't some weird alien landscape where I need to take my time to explore and get my bearings. This is a fucking gas station in California. Similarly, adding a new design element that would have fitted in many earlier levels and won't be likely to appear in later levels doesn't really show any escalation in design quality. At best, it's going to confuse players as to why it's there, and at worst, it's going to make them think that they could greatly benefit from replaying and looking for opportunities to do this again. After all, there should be a tightrope walkable power lines everywhere in the previous cities, right? Yeah, that's going to make for one disappointing second playthrough. Expanding the level with clutter like this tends to give a disjointed feeling and make it feel like it was the modder who was supposed to be having fun and not the player. And you know, that's usually what I expect in a first mod, because most first mods don't promote themselves as improving on a celebrated masterpiece, then somehow get official recognition from a publisher. Regular viewers may have noticed that I take issue with Harris's claim that he uses architecture to enhance levels rather than just decorate. And this level demonstrates pretty clearly why I take issue with that. You just need to take a look at a few key structures. Like game design, architecture is a very broad school of learning that incorporates all kinds of other disciplines, such as engineering, project management, leadership, etc. Essentially, though, it boils down to making structures that are both useful and aesthetically pleasing. In that order. Now, it's not really necessary to learn a lot about architecture for many areas of Deus Ex, because they're based off real things, so you can just Google what an office, a cafe, a restaurant, etc. looks like. You just need to keep in mind the basics, such as whether they have a kitchen, bathroom, office, etc. Obviously, when it's applied to game design, it also needs to include a few concessions toward the actual game mechanics. Whether it's convenient damage that makes for directed progression, a few physics puzzles, or just enough chest-high walls. But the better you understand the concepts like architecture and interior design, the better that you can manipulate things so that it all appears natural and flows for the player. Regional issues. By this I mean factors like social conditions, how much space is available, how much space can people afford, resources available, is it going to be concrete, natural stone, polished hardwood, etc., cultural influences, and environmental conditions. Revision's most compelling creation to date lives in a house that is compact and two-story, which is odd since it's built in a place where there's an abundance of space. It's like it was copied off a house in a much more compact neighborhood, something where building footprints are heavily regulated, and potential for heavy snowfall means you need an angled roof to prevent overloading and also retain heat, like say Finland. A more considered approach, one linking to the visceral core of Deus Ex, would have considered the types of stories the game is trying to tell at this point. Perhaps looked at some iconic imagery from another production that was relatable and set in a similarly desolate area of the same country. See, in oppressively hot and dry places, like the California desert, people tend to prioritize being able to get maximum cooling effect from the wind and exploiting the abundance of space to make buildings with big footprints, rather than try to cram them in and just build multiple levels. That way you end up with a house that doesn't trap the heat inside and slow cook you, just blows off. The narrative priorities at this point are to stress that the world is on the brink of complete collapse. That has been collapsing for decades, and that areas great and small have begun to collapse under the weight of disasters, time and neglect. In this case, it seems pretty clear that this area has been run down for long enough that a small group of bums are happy to specify that they've just been living in the gas station. So, if one were to assign a home to the gas station owner, it would be attached to and part of the gas station, or in such ruin that it was uninhabitable, at least in comparison to the gas station itself. You would also expect it to have been designed for the iconic middle-class family living in the California desert. Pro tip, if you're looking for reference images of California desert homes, be sure to research for towns rather than houses. That way you avoid being deceived by the many images of mansions that architects and real estate agents want to showcase the most, and you get to see where people actually live. Efficiency. I mentioned earlier that this gas station is lit up like Reno, or maybe even Las Vegas, because it makes no sense for so much electricity and light to be wasted in the middle of the desert. This is a lone gas station in the middle of an open area. It only needs enough light that a sleep-deprived truck driver would be able to see it and remember to not drive past it or through it on his way through his route. All of these additional lights and this garish neon display around the gas station, it just represents a massive additional investment in electricity, building costs and maintenance that would make sense in a busy city where you have to shout over the competition, but not in a spot where you're literally more likely to see a sign reading next gas 58 miles. It's not likely to be very glamorous because it doesn't have any sort of reason to be. It's a fucking gas station in the middle of the desert. It's supposed to be where truckers get up to all those shady things you imagine they do. And then it got worse. Functional design and the directing of guests and residents, I suppose. So the basics of a gas station are pretty straightforward. Gas pumps, snacks, other extras for sale, notoriously shady bathrooms, and a cash register. However, the design of them can be a little more complicated. For example, in vanilla and revision, due to the lack of revision, in order to access the bathroom, a guest or employee would have to walk through the cold room where the drinks are loaded and the perishables are stored. Not exactly an ideal arrangement, but one that most people won't notice due to the immediacy of the level, their focus being on the guards, and since it's so run down, it's hard to imagine how it was before this. Instead of adjusting this design and better integrating the garage and the freezer, revisions instead just opted to, well, put a bigger gap between the two buildings and wires across so that access to the hatch on the garage requires walking across a power line like a circus performer, after disposing of the guard who is watching in case someone tries to do this tightrope walk. So now it's overly busy from a game design perspective and nonsensical from any sort of architectural approach. If you want to get to the point where you can really brag about it, you should start making considerations like actual architects do in ensuring safe space is set aside for utilities, such as plumbing, and that space is minimal and inconvenient, that buildings have a natural flow of corridors to direct a person to a set point, or around in circles, or just towards some areas and not others. When you can build a house where a player walks through and feels like they passed through someone's actual house, but never got lost, walked into a dead end, or got confused because of a room layout, then you can say you're employing architecture in your game design. Alternatively, you can just create something like this. Fucking show-offs. What architecture isn't. Architecture is not a term one applies simply to fantasies of the superiority of one's own aesthetic and the belief that they know best what makes for a great look of a building outside of all other requirements for it. A fetish for upskirt view floors, neon lighting, and high-definition textures does not meet the criteria for using architecture, and is, in fact, the opposite of that claim. It's literally transforming the world of Deus Ex into the Palace of Versailles, right down to the toilet problems. As a general rule, if you haven't formally studied architecture, are not an architect or haven't done enough level design that you've developed the knowledge base where you find yourself attracted to studying architecture and interior design out of compulsion, you probably shouldn't be claiming to be using architecture. Just like I shouldn't be claiming I use cinematography or good film editing skills, which I do not. But if you do want to be a level designer, you should study architecture and interior design every chance you get, so that you can learn when you can use the conventions to make your levels more engaging and play better. And by study architecture, I mean study all the stuff like how to direct crowds, where layouts of certain rooms go, and considerations for space and traffic in corridors. Because that shit matters a lot more than arches versus straight lines. So I know a lot of people incorrectly accuse me of nitpicking, and a bunch of others say that I have no idea what could be done well. I just want to complain. So I figured I should talk about some of the obvious missed potential that revising this level had beyond just adjusting the path to the toilets. Consider the story of this place. A gas station with a garage and a junkyard that is isolated enough that apparently it was commercially viable to install an industrial freezer in the garage, one that can comfortably hold an adult human, and where it seems they were dealing in Zyme under the counter. But what else could have been going on out here? If you really wanted to add depth and interest to this level, you would spend a lot of time meditating on these ideas, brainstorming, and trying to think of ways they could be expanded and reflect the history of this world, both recent and less recent. But don't take my word for that. Listen to Harvey Smith talking about his approach to Dishonored 2.
In crafting spaces for you to explore, we've got several creative goals. We want the environment to feel coherent and complete, plausible. Where do these characters live and how do they get to work? Is there a viable pathway that makes sense? Where do they take their breaks or stop for lunch? But it goes further than that. For Dishonored 2, we felt compelled to ask ourselves about the history of a given street or shop. What was there a decade before the player arrives in Karnaca? Often you can see the layers of history, watermarks on the wall from past floods, peeling posters and advertisements from years ago. We want every market, every alley to tell a story and to offer you the chance to see something novel or intriguing.
This is why his games are famed for having such rich level design for those who want to take their time to explore. And for this level, even though you don't necessarily have the technology, the team, or the tools that Harvey does, you still have the potential for showing what the gas station had been before the United States started to collapse, showing what the collapse transformed the gas station into, potentially implementing some of the ideas that Warren had planned but never got to implement in the story for various reasons. Now, you, the one taking the time to type out the comment pointing out that Harvey hadn't made this speech at the time they were working on this. I know. You know what else I know? You can see evidence of his approach and similar techniques all throughout Deus Ex. Like, literally the opening cutscene and the first visit to Liberty Island are demonstrations of this. Not to mention Vanilla's Hell's Kitchen's levels, how they change, evolve, and all the stories that can be found just wandering around there. It's also a pretty standard element known as diegetic storytelling.
This covered body is an example of how we tell a story in the levels without using any words or overt storytelling. We wanted to show that there are other people in the world that are survivors like you. We figured most people wouldn't survive very long and you'd come across their bodies, but we needed a way to set these apart from all the dead ragdolls of the common infected. By simply covering a body with a blanket or a sheet, it becomes really obvious that this guy had a buddy, a friend, and when he went down, his friend had compassion and covered him up. This also tells a story about the state of the world, that they wouldn't want to go out and bury the body. They couldn't expose themselves to infected. So they'd have the bodies right there with them, but covered.
These are the kinds of opportunities a revision of a level allows you as a modder, assuming you want to do a mod that is relatively true to the material and not a transgressive mod of some sort. Remember, this is pitched as a revisit of the visceral core and an overall improvement on the original. Of course, if you're a really good level designer, you might consider the potential for making the inside of the gas station a cat and mouse game where you use partial cover of the shelves, etc., to take down a couple of guards without setting off an alarm, assuming you players don't just gas grenade them or find some other ultra-violent playstyle. Other details. Sound like too much work? That's cool. This was an unpaid project after all. Here's a quick list of things that you could have done to polish up this level a little more. Update the gas prices to appear astronomical even in today's economy. Spruce up the inside of the garage to look like a garage. Give Sandra Renton and Tiffany Savage some clothes that don't scream 90s comics. Build a bum camp inside the gas station to make it look more like they actually lived inside the gas station until very recently.
A long way from a city. How do you get by out here?
We were living in the gas station.
They threw us out.
Put some smashed up field barracks behind the station to match the bum's dialogue.
Need any hardware? The Army used to have a command post up there. I found weapon mods for accuracy and recoil, which you can have for $750 and $400. Also a rebreather. How about $1,500?
Expand the size of the gas station so that it includes other features common to long-haul stops, such as dining areas, a kitchen, hardware shop, novelty shop, rest area, etc. Make a secret underground Zymlad from a fuel tanker buried out the back, like Breaking Bad. Add some signage, etc. to indicate the mechanic shop also runs a salvage business, hence the junkyard. Spruce up the junkyard because, well...
Sure, I'll drop you off on the way.
So, as usual, they've done absolutely nothing to the exit. It's only the end of the level. Why would it be important? At this point I've given up, so let's go. After this it's the sub-base, which is a nice short level. I'm sure it'll be very pointless. I can't keep a straight face. Fuck my life. We'll do that in the next video. If there's anything to learn from this, it's that level design greatly benefits from a sense of purpose, aesthetic consistency, and pacing. A short, well-assembled level with a sense of urgency and narrative is way more satisfying than the same level expanded out with empty spaces, neon lights, and out-of-place set pieces. Level design is not, contrary to what many people claim, a volume business. None of the changes made really alter anything about how you handle the level. You just basically tase or kill everyone, then let Tiffany run, or let her die. They just add time to the level, and overall it's a very poor return on investment for the level designer and the player alike. The real challenge for this level was to fit more life and personality into a tense gameplay scenario. After all, the novelty of this level is supposed to be the additional tension that if you fuck up, then Tiffany might die.
You interfere in any way, I will kill that young woman. I mean it.
So, like, shadows that make it harder to know for sure where all the guards are, and a more fortified position would have worked better than the world's most ridiculous security cam and tightrope walk. Seriously, how can that guy not see me? To be honest, the best way to improve the impact of this level would have been to make changes to the previous level. Changes that humanized Tiffany and turned her into more than an abstract objective goal. Dreams and ambitions that would make the player feel that her life and death really mattered. But that takes risks, insight, and considerable writing ability, none of which they were really interested in here. And it's no mystery why this happened. Most people who get into game modding, specifically the level design type, they don't do it with the dream of building more realistic bathrooms in gas stations, considering how to expand a throwaway character, listening to every line of dialogue and making notes, then roughing up a design, listening to every line of dialogue again, and redlining everything that doesn't fit. Nor really should you if you're just messing around, wanting to play with some ideas, share an idea with the modding community, play with some tools and see if you like it. However, if you want to make the claim that you are improving on an already sound product, you're going to have to do that. Same if you're planning to getting into a professional level of designing. And this applies to almost every aspect of quality commercial design and creative industry. The reality is people don't pay for someone to just have fun doodling. They pay for someone to painstakingly look at everything that they've done, then do the hard, boring work of assessing everything, adjusting everything, reassessing, readjusting, reassessing, readjusting over and over until everything fits together. What you have to do to improve your skills. What you have to do to get Steve Gaynor good.
Those aren't push-ups. Steve Gaynor knows how to do a push-up. Sometimes he walks around in like a fancy suit, sometimes just a bathing suit, and we're cool with it. Because that's Steve Gaynor. Steve Gaynor cool.
This, incidentally, is also why you shouldn't pick overhauling a highly acclaimed cult classic immersive sim as your first game mod project. Then invest 9 years in it, then another 2 years patching it, well, at least another 2. I mean, who knows when they're going to stop. Make your mistakes fast. Make them early. Learn and either fix them if possible or move on so you can leave them in the past. There's absolutely no shame in being a beginner. Literally everyone started there. But if you don't recognize that, then you're going to hamstring yourself with delusions of grandeur. If you're interested in seeing tight design done well, I highly recommend checking out Death of the Outsider, which I truly believe is Harvey Smith's best work to date, and checking out Echo, a game where you actually get to teach the AIs how to kill you. Isn't that nice? Oh, and also check out Terrible Writing Advice's video on Cyberpunk, which focuses on the recent Deus Ex games that also made a lot of these mistakes. So yeah, I'm going to try to rush through the sea base in the next video so we can finally get to the end of the game. But now I present to you what is becoming increasingly my favorite part of these videos. Checking out what changes Caustic Creative made to their mod they released over 2 years ago. Well, now there's around 250 achievements, putting it well past the level where anyone would seriously care about these things, but not high enough to be worth getting for achievement farming. It also helps cement my status as Revision's biggest fan. After all, I have this achievement, which apparently less than 1% of players have. They've added a fancy new model for the Statue of Liberty because at this point the sunk cost fallacy seems to have cursed Caustic Creative with never moving past this project. And honestly, did anyone ask for this? Does anyone know of any review of Deus Ex where they went, well, really what it needed was a different Statue of Liberty? They've made some adjustments to previous levels here, but I don't see any way in which any of these are really an improvement, especially not doubling down on your rocket research base having giant storehouses of ammunition for, like, no reason. It's the Air Force, people. Oh, and apparently now flies die when they enter water. What even... Who checks for that? Take care, guys.
Thank you.